Hey guys, it's Sign here with Hobbies Man once again, and today we're doing our Cimmerian September video. So I wanted to do more of these for the Sword and Sorcery book club, but I just didn't get around to it. I ended up reading a lot of this web serial called Wandering In, which I recommend if you guys are interested in kind of more modern kind of takes on fantasy and some game elements in your fantasy. I basically blasted through 4 books in that series. And doing so meant that I had less time to do all of the other reading that I wanted to do. So I didn't get to read as much Conan as I wanted to, but I did finish the first Coming of Conan book, right? The Conan, the first book in the Del Rey collection from Conan, or for Conan. I've managed to finish it. This is part 5 in the series because I've already reviewed everything else that was in here. This is basically just the Miscellanea, right? So the Miscellanea isn't really about published Robert E. Howard stories. It's more about things that relate to the stories that were mentioned here, and it's also about Robert E. Howard's writing process. And I found that to be very valuable. I'm not necessarily someone that's deeply interested in how the creators that I love created their work, because it's not that important to me. Like, you know, ultimately the idea is more or less the same for every creator, right? They were inspired, they had a process, they followed their process, and then they eventually made their story, right? And I'm not necessarily such a big fan of Robert E. Howard that I need to know every little, thing about his life. But I find a lot of value in what's included here, even if I don't necessarily find this to be the most interesting, because it is really cool to have the opportunity to see what this stuff is, right? To see deeper into Robert E. Howard, because, well, there's no interviews with him, right? Like, there's no appearances of him on TV. There is no way for me to connect with him beyond the work that has been done already, right? And visiting his house, I did have this sense of reverence, not necessarily to Robert E. Howard, because I feel like if he was, if he had lived into his 80s and stuff and been able to be on TV, I would have probably not liked him, right, as a person, but I really appreciate his work, right? But I felt a certain level of reverence to his ability to write, even though there was nothing to inspire him in the area that he lived in, right? Because the area he lives in, it's naturally beautiful, right? There's lots of nature, right? But it is not impressive nature. There's nothing about it that could really ignite the spark of his imagination in the way that it seems that, he was able to do. And so getting to see all of the stuff here in the Miscellanea is really meaningful to me in the sense that it helps me understand where it comes from, right? And so even though it's not necessarily interesting, right? Like, it's not something that I deeply desire to find out about, having the chance to do so was meaningful. So some of the stuff that's included here is the first draft of the Phoenix on the Sword after he rewrote it from this axe by this axe I rule, right? So there's some differences here in the start. It's a bit more political kind of feeling in the beginning. It has a bit more of a political scheming kind of vibe to it. It almost has kind of like a vague sense of like Game of Thrones, right? Or like a political thriller movie where you have a group of clandestine people meeting, and they're kind of deciding how do we best execute this person, right? And I found that to be enjoyable. I thought that vibe was cool, but I feel like, I didn't find the rest of the story significantly, enhanced by this, and so I think that ultimately the version that was ultimately published was probably the better version. But there was an interesting kind of bit here at the beginning where I found the vibe of the political scheming to be enjoyable, right? We have some notes on the people of the Hyborian Age. And when I initially saw this title, I thought it'd be really valuable in understanding the social-political differeces of the Hyborian Age, but it really isn't. It's mostly just very vague notes about Aquilonia, Cimmeria, and Nemedia, I think. I can't remember exactly what it was. Maybe it was Nordheim. Let's see. Let me just double-check that. It was 3 different groups. One of them was the Aquilonians. One of them was the Cimmerians. And the last one was the Gundermen, or basically what are essentially German people in the Hyborian Age, right? So that's pretty cool. Nothing too much to say about this one, to be honest with you. But it was interesting to have that kind of distinction between those 3 groups be so clearly defined, right? Then we have the Hyborian Age essay. This is a 8,000 word essay or something like that. I can't remember exactly how long it is, but it's a pretty long essay detailing the process by which Robert E. Howard came up with the setting of the Hyborian Age, right? And so he kind of takes this quasi-historical kind of lean to his writing, where he creates a picture. He paints you the process through which civilizations rose and fell, and then the drifts of humans as they moved across this region, and then eventually finishes up by detailing which groups in the Hyborian Age eventually became modern humans, right? And where they ended up positioning themselves and being in the modern chronology of the world, right? And I really love this. Reading it on its own without having access to any maps of the Hyborian Age is a bit confusing, because things don't really get explained. There's not a real sense of where things are in the writing, right? But so it's a bit confusing. But I loved the world building aspect. I loved how interested Howard was in developing his world and understanding what the groups of people were, why they were in constant conflict, what the conflict was, where and when and why they existed in these different ways. And I thought that was wonderful. I thought that there was a lot of value in that, right? And I recommend that you read this essay with a map of the Hyborian Age on your screen somewhere, because it'll be really helpful in understanding, the way in which these people move, right? And then you might want to see a map of the modern world to see, how it compares, right? It might not be that interesting to you, but it was definitely interesting to me. And if I reread this, I would read it with a picture of a map up on my screen, right? So yeah, then we have synopsis number 1. Not much to say here. I can't tell what story this was supposed to be, but it was pretty familiar to me, so I'm sure it was one of the stories contained in this volume, but I just can't place it quite right? And then synopsis 2 and 3 were the Scarlet Citadel and Black Colossus, and they were actually a bit different from what the story ended up being, and I think that's because Robert E. Howard wrote the synopsises first, and then came up with a story based on the synopsises, and as he was going through this process, things changed a bit to highlight what he decided was more important than not, right? So, maybe I'm misunderstanding the process, but I think that's how that worked. Then we have a fragment here. I thought it was cool. I wonder if it was turned into a comic book, but I can't really remember exactly off the top of my head what the fragment was about. So let's just look at it here. So let's see. Battle stretched silent, crimson pools everywhere. There was no chariot wheels. However, kind of randomly out of nowhere, a Cimmerian shows up with a great black mane and smoldering blue eyes. He carefully but impatiently moves among the dead, finding if any of them had any money on them, any value to them. And as he's moving through, he finds a young, naked white woman and decides to help her along. And I think this is what eventually kind of ends up turning into the Vale of Lost Women, something like that. It mentions the city of Yaralet, which I'm guessing is by the Vilayet Sea, but I'm not sure. And I wonder if this was ever turned into a comic book or anything like that. Then we have a synopsis here that connects to a draft, and this is the Shambhala story. I'm sure that this was turned into a comic book, but I'm not deeply into the old Marvel comics, so I'm not really sure. But this is a pretty great visualization of his writing process. So he writes a synopsis where he mentions, the characters that are involved, the people that are involved, the setting that's involved, and kind of some background on all of these different aspects. And then he transitions over to telling you what the story timeline is kind of supposed to be, and then he writes the story. And I think there were some issues with this one specifically, but the story was pretty boring to me, but the process through which he went through was really awesome. I really enjoyed that. Then we have some Hyborian names and countries and maps. So the names and countries is just a random list of things, and it seems like they're organized by like person, country of origin, and gods that they kind of deal with. And it was pretty interesting, but it's pretty outdated. You know, this is kind of early days, it seems like. And so this isn't a comprehensive list, although I would like to see one, actually. I think that'd be cool. And the maps were pretty good. It looks like Howard sketched out tracings of the maps of Europe as they were understood at the time, and then overlaid or created a second layer with his own drawings above it to outline the version that he wanted for the Hyborian Age, right? And so you get to see that Singara was, Spain. You get to see that Colonia was France. You get to see that Cimmeria was actually the land between Denmark and the British Isles, right? Then you get to see Nordheim was basically Scandinavia, the northern part of Scandinavia. And you get to see that the Pictish lands were lands beyond the Irish Isle, and stuff like that. It was pretty cool. The Brythunians, who end up being the Britons, are actually pretty far east on the Hyborian Age map, and I thought that was cool. It's kind of interesting that they moved all the way over there, because then that means that, when Howard speaks about Anglo-Saxon stock and how that's valuable, he's not really talking about the Anglo-Saxons as they would really be. He's talking about Brythunians, right? And I think that's fun and interesting and kind of a bit, what's it called? Stupid on Robert E. Howard's part, because he creates this mythology and then he doesn't stick to his own kind of stories. But I guess it's just based on the fact that he didn't want to do that, or that he thought the Anglo-Saxons were pretty important. And it's pretty interesting. I don't know. I had this thought while reading this. I was like, dude, you end up within your own story. Being of Anglo-Saxon stock means that you're Eastern European, but you hate modern Eastern Europeans, and that's kind of weird, right? Or like modern to Howard's time, right? And I thought that was pretty funny, but it is what it is. And then finally, kind of the most important part here is the Hyborian Genesis by Patrice Lornay. Let's see if I can try to pronounce his name properly here. Patrice Lonet, right? So let's go with Lonet because he is French. And this was awesome. I really enjoyed this essay. It's kind of like a biographical essay, or kind of like an explanatory essay on how Hyboria came to be. And it teaches us a lot about Howard's inspiration and stuff like that. There is kind of a bit that doesn't make too much sense to me. And it's that, Robert E. Howard kind of ascribed his depressive moods to his county of origin, his region in Texas where he was born, Dark Valley, right? And I think it's near Fredericksburg, which is this little German town here in Houston, here in Texas, that is pretty popular as a kind of like a little touristic kind of area to go to, and then just kind of go back home after you drink a lot, right? And he attributes that to his depressiveness to his region of origin, and apparently that's supposed to be what inspired him to create Cimmeria in this dark, brooding country with our main character who is also dark and brooding, like his place of origin. The thing is that Robert E. Howard didn't live in this place enough to really be affected by its gloominess, right? I think he left Dark Valley and moved over to Cross Plains when he was about 2 years old, right? So, unless he was a very developed young 2-year-old, there's no way that the gloominess of his hometown really affected him, right? Now I understand that he was being like dramatic, right? And he seems to have done that a lot, actually, which is pretty funny. Thinking about it, that Robert E. Howard was this like drama queen theater kid that couldn't do either of those things, so he just decided to write and gossip with his writing buddies, right? But I found it interesting, even if I kind of, it felt a bit stupid for him to say stuff like that, because the idea that Robert E. Howard's depressiveness, which ultimately is what killed him, right? We can kind of assume that to be pretty clear. Robert E. Howard was very depressed mostly, I'm guessing due to the situation that he found himself in, right? That he was someone that wanted to escape and see greater things, but he could not. He had a mother who was basically ailing the whole time that he was alive, or at least that's my understanding of it. And he basically had to be the one to take care of her. And I don't know what his relationship with his dad was. I don't think that it was ever kind of mentioned to us. And he lived in this like post-depression kind of life, right? Or maybe mid-depression, kind of like the Great Depression, not like himself being depressed, although he was. And so his life sucked for him and for everyone around him. And so using that as inspiration is wonderful. I think that was amazing, right? And, you know, it's something that all artists do. But the fact that it turned into such a badass, enduring, awesome character as Conan is to be admired, right? And I think that Patrice manages to kind of hit on that without trying to very well in this essay, and I really like it. And I think that the connections that he demonstrates between Robert E. Howard and all of the other authors that he mentions, and the way that they're, you know, inspired and inspired in turn by history and also by each other, and the way that Robert E. Howard was able to really do kind of a George Lucas thing and just coalesce and condense and repackage a bunch of different things into this great kind of story is awesome, right? I really like that. Now, you can argue that maybe that means that they're not really great artists, right? Because all they did was just reuse and rehash. But they reused and rehash in such a valuable way, in such a great way, that I find that it is artistic, right? And so I found this to be a very interesting read. I find that it might be pretty cool if this was also included in the comic book somewhere, right? Maybe later on, once people understand that, you know, the Conan character comes from this legacy of writing. And so I would like to see this be added into the comic books coming up, right? Or maybe make this like part of the stuff that's included when we get a hardcover edition or a deluxe edition of the Titan stuff, right? I think that'd be really cool. Or make it part of the the Savage Sword of Conan books, right? Going forward, that'd be pretty interesting. And then finally, we get a bit of a chronology of Robert E. Howard's writing, how that was decided, and it was really interesting because, like from an outsider looking in, it seems almost psychotic. Like the lengths through which these people that did all of this work had to go to find out the timing of things, right? Like, oh, Robert E. Howard wrote this story because he used to do this when he was this age, but now that he's this older age, he does it differently, and so we know that anything that was in this way was from this period, and anything that was not like that would be from a different period. Like, that is an insane level of dedication. It's insanely valuable to people that want to write this, write literary work and academic work on Robert E. Howard. And so, you know, I commend the work that was done, but Jesus Christ, like looking at it from like an outsider's perspective, like it's dedication to like an insane degree, and I really respect it. And then we have some final notes there about some changes that were made to the story to put it in. Mostly it's just you know, fixing some grammar stuff and wording and things like that. So it's not like this is anything egregious, right? And ultimately, I think that this is a great read. I really enjoy the whole book. I want to come back to this later and kind of rank all of the stories properly. And I think I'll do that as a separate video because I don't feel like doing it right now. So I will come back to this later, probably when I finish reading all of the Conan stories. But basically, if this is the only thing that I read for Cimmerian September, I'm happy with that. I do want to read at least one of the stories in The Bloody Crown of Conan. And I will try to do that within the next couple days, but the video won't come out until after Cimmerian September. So it is what it is, right? It's just kind of worked out that way. So yeah. I'm sure this was a pretty boring video for you guys, so if you clicked away, I won't fault you for it. But if you stayed, you know, let me know down in the comments. Thank you very much for doing so, and I will see you guys in the next video. So see you guys later.